Biased Reviews. I'm Asha Dore, and I'm here talking to Gina Frangello.
Hi, I'm Gina Frangello. I'm really excited to be on Asha's podcast. I am the author of six books, most recently, two books of nonfiction. Blow Your House Down, a story of family, feminism, and treason, which was published in 2021 and is a memoir, kind of hybrid with cultural criticism. And most recently, just in July, Elena Ferrante, the Neapolitan Novels, and it's kind of a hybrid of memoir and scholarly work on the My Brilliant Friend series that people may know from HBO, even if they haven't read the
It seems
books.
like there are often themes of female friendship.
If you go way back, which no one really has done like that sort of deep diving because my early books have not even been available for a while. They're about to be re-released, my first two books on Northwestern University Press in the fall. However, I'm obsessed with friendship and female dyads essentially in all my work. And I think a lot about Milan Kundera, who's one of my favorite writers, talking about how basically everyone is kind of obsessed with, three central themes, if not one central theme. And he says like his has to do with the effect of totalitarianism on the individual. And I'm like, well, that's very lofty. Mine has to do with dynamics between female friends, sisters. It's always the central dynamic in all my books, even though they also have a lot to do with, kind of power dynamics and psychosexual relationships between men and women as well. But there is always kind of a central female dynamic at the center of the book. And oftentimes, one of the members is now missing in some way, either dead or having gone, not missing as in like, abducted and a missing person, but like, there's one left behind. And that relationship, that sort of haunting central relationship, is the through line of the book. And so obviously you can see where Ferrante and the story of Lenu and Lila would speak to me so much, as Lila is literally missing at the opening of the book, and the entire Neapolitan quartet, so to speak, has to do with Lenu kind of trying to write her back into existence by doing the thing that she always said she'd never do, which is write about her. And she's kind of expecting to provoke Lila in some way into reemerging. And so that was so, I mean, I have so many parallels with Ferrante's, with those characters in Ferrante's novels, that I will stop there because it's really what kind of drove the whole concept of the book, is like, how do I pick up a book by an Italian writer of a certain age, of uncertain gender, and who lived in Naples and grew up, in the 40s or something. And I, as a Chicago American woman, also Italian American, but would read it and feel like these books were my life.
Mhm.
And so that was kind of what prompted me to write the books.
To connect it with your memoir, in what way do you think that like female friendships kind of influence the major action of your memoir?
Blow Your House Down is purposely about a lot of things. It's kind of about full catastrophe living as a middle-aged American woman. So there isn't, I think, I hope, any one dominant storyline, so to speak. I mean, it's about caregiving, my elderly parents, being a medical patient with cancer, being a parent, getting a divorce due to my own infidelity, as well as other things. And then trying to make a go of a new life with a new partner amidst all this sudden illness and the fallout of divorce and all of these things. But the catalyst for the book, I won't say, actually, not the catalyst for the book, the catalyst for these things in my life, was the illness and very rapid death of my friend Kathy in 2011. And that is one of the kind of like opening, you know, pivotal moments of the book after which nothing is ever going to be the same for me, although of course I don't know that yet, but I think Kathy really haunts that book. And I think it's also strange because in our friendship the power dynamic definitely seemed to be, if anything, tilted a little bit towards me, but in reality my whole life changed after her death. And it's not, I mean, I made choices that caused my life to change, as well as bizarre things like me also getting cancer when she had died of cancer, so it's not as though, her death contained some magical power and I was a passive recipient, but losing her changed everything about how I lived going forward. And I do think that had she not died, a lot in my life would be different. And in that sense, it was really interesting because probably one of the reasons I ended up writing a memoir is because that was such a quintessential storyline of my fiction. I mean, I'm primarily a fiction writer. My first four books were fiction. And as I started to see kind of the way Kathy's death had affected me and impacted my choices, my life, how I viewed life, what I wanted out of life, what I wanted out of myself, um, it was pretty impossible not to note that I was kind of living the theme that I'd been visiting in my fiction since I practically had started writing. And so, yeah, I think it is really at the core of what I write. And I don't really know why that is. I mean, obviously, my female friendships are important to me, but why this particular theme haunts all my work, I don't really know.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And it's interesting too, because I think you called it like a niche, or the audience of this newer book, like a niche audience. And
Right, for the
yet,
Ferrante book, yeah.
yeah, but yet there's a HBO show like
Yes,
based on.
yes. So less niche, basically, maybe than anything I've ever written in
Which
that light.
I think it's really common for a lot of art, at least my thinking and people I know's thinking and like narratives and framing of our lives to be kind of based on friendships, but
Mhm.
not really a lot of our stories that we read or see or consume in any way in media. Like
Yeah,
it's just weirdly absent. And so it feels niche, but I think it's actually really common, which is like
I
bizarre.
agree.
I mean, form in both of the books that we're talking about is really interesting. Like I'm very curious about the footnotes, which I found to be awesome in the
I'm
newer book.
glad.
And then yeah, and then like of course form in the memoir is really specific to your book. So do you want to talk about those things?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of a junkie for those things. You know, I have written a lot of kind of traditional narrative essays, and I don't view myself as like some kind of avant-garde writer or anything like that. I didn't come of age in that tradition, so to speak. It was happening. Like a lot of the people I knew were involved with FC2 and were really into, you know, plot and character are dead and all of these things and language for language sake. And I was not in that camp. I mean, character is the lifeblood of my fiction. I'm obsessed with all my characters. I would never write about anyone I'm not obsessed with. Like that to me really is the impetus. It's the thing is someone starts to be alive and then I can't make them not alive. So I have to write them down. But so somehow along the way, maybe because I was so influenced by Kundera and his use of third person editorial omniscience, and the way that if you push it far enough, what is, in a sense, the most authorial intrusion, panoramic third person eats its own tail and becomes first person, right? So I'm interested in all the ways that functions. And so I started using that a lot in my own writing. And then once I was doing that, form just started kind of breaking open and going crazy. So I mean, like in Blow Your House Down, there's a chapter written like a dictionary. There's a chapter that is written, just a series of A words. It's outlined the story of A, and how kind of literature, medicine, law, film, etc., popular culture has viewed adultery through the ages. And so, yeah, I mean, to me, I think because the memoir was not all about one thing, it did not feel like the same form worked for each section. So the pieces that are about caregiving my parents, many of which grew from pieces I had already published online years before when my parents were alive. And they were changed and cracked open for the memoir. But those pieces tend to be fairly straight traditional essays. And then other things I didn't know how to write about them in a linear way. And you've been in a class of mine, so you know that I'm obsessed with Pam Houston's Corn Maze, and she talks about nonlinearity and its connection to kind of like you know trauma and other types of disturbance. And certainly when I was writing my memoir in particular, my whole life had blown apart in so many ways, that I think I did not have the same sort of access to linear, orderly thinking that I often had felt, like in a book like A Life in Men. You're holding all these balls, and you're really like your rate of revelation is everything, and you're doing it in this kind of like, it has parallel timelines, but they're both linear, they're just separate. And all of that is so important to how the book functions, and I love that too. That's a different type of puzzle. But for me, with Blow Your House Down, it became, how do you find a form that works for each one of these stories, and yet still make them part of a whole? No, I'm really grateful for houses like Counterpoint that have distribution through Penguin Random House, and that are very sophisticated and so forth, and are not micro presses, but that are not part of these corporate conglomerates where they have a little bit more autonomy in terms of being able to pursue things for their own artistic taste, than the big imprints do these days. And so, yeah, I feel really happy to be there. I love them. I love Dan Smetanka. I like sing his praises all over the internet for many years now. I think he's just, I mean, obviously I've not worked with every editor in publishing, but he's the best editor I've ever worked with by far. I think he's a genius. So, very happy to be there.
That's awesome. And is this, I didn't even look to see where this book was published. I can't. I have no
Oh,
idea.
the Ferrante book. No,
Yeah.
that's on IG. Robert Lasner was the editor of that. It's a particular series. It's funny how I got the book deal, which was like on Twitter by blathering, and then ended up with like a book deal on Twitter, which I'm obviously not on anymore, dear God. But like we need to burn some clearing herbs or something to get rid of the name of Twitter. But in any case, I at that time I was talking on Twitter about like someone needs to pay me to write a book about blah blah blah. And my friend David Yulin, who I think basically added Robert Lasner at IG Publishing because he runs the Bookmark series. And I had read some of their books, but I didn't think of him. Um, you know, Writers write about their favorite books or books that really impacted them. Steve Almond's done it. Robin Black's done it. A lot of different writers who I really like have done it. And so I knew the series. And so as soon as Yulin mentioned that, I was like, I have to do that. And it was then, basically hacked out on Twitter.
That's amazing.
Right.
And I'm interested in the way that this book kind of treats your memoir kind of like a peer too. Like it kind of makes a comment on a lot of the things that you chose to leave out. And I don't know if you want to talk
Right.
about how they work.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, so when I first wanted to do the book on Ferrante and her four books in particular, I I didn't imagine them being partially memoir. I just wanted to write about Ferrante's books. But the Bookmark series is a hybrid memoir criticism series. And so one of the things that was really fun is that I got to talk a lot about my best girlfriend since we were 10, who actually has an almost non-existent role in my memoir. Like She is so close to me. I mean, she is absolutely one of the core primary relationships of my entire life. Like I don't know if I would be alive without her. And but the thing is that every book is kind of like you stick a skewer down the center of its themes or its plot or its thesis if it were an academic paper, and if it doesn't touch the skewer, it doesn't go in the book. And she's mentioned because for a while, when my first husband and I were in the process of our divorce, we tried to nest, and we time shared an apartment in the building that we co-owned with her and her husband. So she's a vague, small character, but her role in my life has been so immense that felt insane, but yet it was true to the book, right? And so the Ferrante book really gave me the chance because we grew up together in a neighborhood not very unlike the Naples neighborhood where Lenu and Lila grow up, and we both had aspirations of getting out. And she ended up teaching at our old elementary school. I basically, like, she's the contemporary Welcome Back Cotter, you know, and really stayed connected to the old neighborhood, whereas like I kind of couldn't go far enough, but then eventually, like decades later, ended up living only 4 miles away, from it. And she and I raised our children 4 blocks away from each other. Anyway, that was an enormous pleasure to be able to delve into our relationship in a lot of depth in ways that just had not fit with the memoir, which was about so many things that it couldn't bear being about anything else gratuitously, just because, like, oh, I love her, I have to put her in here. Like, if she's not really involved in the several plots that are being, juggled, then she doesn't really belong in there except for to be mentioned. But here she's got a lot of airspace. And another character from Blow Your House Down also gets a fair amount of space in the Ferrante, because she also was from my neighborhood and my youth and so forth.
Yeah, and in the Ferrante book, like I'd love for you to talk about the footnotes. Like I think my favorite one starts with the sentence that is something like, "What the fuck does that even mean?" Which is like the best start of a footnote ever. Like at first, I read past the footnotes at first, and then I went back and I was like, "That's a big footnote. I'm going to read that." Like the very, because it takes up like half the page. I think the first one does.
Yes.
And then I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, this is part of the story." Whoops.
It's I mean, they often are, right? And
Yeah.
I have managed, Asha. I feel like someone should maybe give me a prize or at least a glass of champagne, like, for the fact that I've managed throughout all my other books not to write footnotes, and we're not supposed to do it because obviously, like, then David Foster Wallace, like, he claimed it and now it's his. Even though I do applaud other people who do it anyway. But I think in footnotes, there's always a footnote. Like, everything I ever write, there's like a footnote going on. And I've managed to keep them out of like my kind of creative work. And I was so excited. Like, the bookmark books are only supposed to be about 40,000 words. Mine is longer because everything I do is longer. But would it have been longer? I would have had a 40,000 word book of footnotes. So that was great fun, and I'm happy anyone actually read them. I wasn't sure anyone would, but I enjoyed them.
Yeah, they're really fun. I mean, and it's interesting because I think some of them complicate both, like, you know, the story of the Ferrante books and then the story of your life. Like it's not like they're one or the other, I think,
Right, right,
correct? Okay.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which is cool because it just stirs up this idea that like a footnote is going to be a dry thing, which of course,
I do write a column on Psychology Today. I write essays on Psychology Today, and of course I do still sometimes write essays, but well, my next book is kind of a novel-ish. It's kind of a hybrid of like autofiction and fictionalized nonfiction, and then fiction about characters who I've been writing about for a long time. So they kind of exist within a particular universe of like the fake version of me. So I don't know, Asha, you may never read this book. It's really weird. No one may ever publish it. So I'm at work on it, and it's absolutely, I don't know what I'm gonna do with it to wrangle it, but it's fun.
It sounds fun. And I think it's the zeitgeist. Like everybody now, like I talk to these like publishers and they're like, oh, you have to choose a genre or whatever. But then you see these like books that like In the Dream House, and then like my friend
Oh
Shane
yeah.
book kind of like that coming out. And all of his books are auto fiction, but also I mean, like they're definitely fiction, but then they're like kind of whatever. They're weird. And
Right.
it's just, I think it's like what's coming, even though everyone wants to fucking resist it and pretend that it's not. Like we're all accepting finally that like there's no real, truth that we can all agree on in our the history of our lives, right? So what's not fiction?
Yes. Yes. I mean, there's a line in A Life in Man, um, that I feel like is one of those things that I wrote before I knew I needed it. So that book came out in 2014, but sold in 2011. And it actually sold before Kathy even died. So it really was before a certain segment of my life. But the line is, there is never only one truth, there is only one truth at a time. And, you know, with all due respect to the fact that I also have written a lot of journalism, and that there are things called facts, and that they're flying way too free and loose with them in the world today. But I also do feel like, you know, you yourself wouldn't write the book you wrote a year later, 10 years later, 20 years later. Like, no matter how true it is at the moment that you're writing it. Elizabeth Crane has a memoir literally titled This Story Will Change. And that's just the reality of our lives. Like our lives are a game of telephone whispered over and over and over again in our own ear. And until it doesn't necessarily bear a complete resemblance to what it may have started out as, but that's our memory of it. One of my favorite books in the world is Maxine Hong Kingston's The Woman Warrior. And, in her memoir, I mean, she's got chapters about relatives who might even have not existed, doing things they may or may not have done because it was the story in her family. And it's like, it's all about the lens and what are you trying to get at? And obviously, you can't just write a thing that is fully not true and then be like, and this is absolutely true. But part of a memoir is interrogating our own stories and like, is this what it was? And I feel like one of the hallmarks of a memoir that I'm interested in reading, and certainly was the case for me in writing mine, is that the story by the end of the book is not the story you thought you were going to write. You know,
Mhm.
you you learn things, and you come to see yourself above all other things in a different way in the process of writing it. And you're like, oh, wait, this person isn't who I thought she was, and it's kind of like, so memoir is like it's sort of like writing a mystery, and you're the riddle, and you have to kind of know something new and probably not great about yourself by the end that you didn't know when you started.
I like that a lot because I'm a speech language pathologist and we
Right.
teach people, like I think the most effective way of teaching people is the mentorship model, which I've always felt like memoir is kind of the mentorship model of life. Like
Mm-hmm.
if
Mm-hmm.
it's a well done memoir that's not all about like sort of Jesus style redemption in like a very used up way, um it's like you are showing someone else your process for the benefit of them being able to engage in a similar process, even if their life is very different from yours.
Well, right. I mean, it's if you look at the AA model, people learn from story. And it's not like what they learn from the story of someone who stands up in AA or NA and gives their story. It's not like they learned, oh, that's how to be a great person. Like that's a guru. I'm going to go be just like them. One of the things I don't like about a certain period we went through in women's memoir is that it seemed like there was a gurufication of the memoir writer where you were supposed to be some sort of like wild inspiration, and the reader was supposed to want to be like you. And I do whole talks about the difference between aspirational versus relatable memoir. And I was very determined not to be an aspirational, like a guru type figure. I didn't have to work that hard, Asha, but anyway, but that being said, like I'm not interested in that kind of work. I'm not interested in someone self-helping me in narrative. I mean, like if I want to read a self-help book, I'll read one. And so for me, it was all about, like, I'm not in AA or anything like that, but my husband's in recovery, and I know a fair amount about it. And that, as a former therapist, it's such a powerful thing. It's like testimony helps us learn what we want. It helps us learn our own process. It helps us see ourselves, not because the other person's testimony is like they're better than you and they know more than you. It may be the opposite, but through hearing story of what people have faced and how they faced it and what the consequences were. And do you how do you process what happened to them and the choices they made? That's how we learn who we are.
I think that you're kind of doing that in the Ferrante book with your own story. There's whole chapters that kind of interrogate these like intersecting things, like, class and like gender-based or sexual violence,
Right.
and so like taking like stories from your life and stories from the Ferrante books, and then our idea of who the author is and all these different aspects to show like how that happens. It seems like this book is actually like, even though I haven't read the Ferrante novels, I've read parts of them in classes, but I've never like invested in like the whole thing, mostly because by the time they came to me, the question of who this person was more important to everyone than anything else. And I really get frustrated with any kind of celebrity making, even if it's celebrity making of something I don't know.
Frustrating situation,
Yeah.
yes.
So I just rejected it. But like, so not knowing the books, I felt like I didn't need to. I didn't need to. I was
Right.
able to like understand the investigation to a degree that probably I'd understand better if I read them, but still, it
No, but that was a goal. So it's actually really nice for me to hear that from you. My debut novel is a retelling of a Freud case study, the Dora case study. And it was very much my goal in writing that novel that you shouldn't even have to know like the most basic thing about Freud, much less have read that case study, to read the book fully. Now, that's not to say that there wouldn't be extra layers of meaning, but it shouldn't be like a shallow read where you don't really get that much out of it. Oh, you really have to be in the club. And so that experience of figuring out how to do that really shaped how I wrote the Ferrante book, where I was trying to do kind of the same thing, even though her name is literally on, it's the title of the book. So probably, unless you're having me on a podcast, nobody who hasn't read Ferrante is actually gonna buy this book, most likely. But generally speaking, like that was my goal, is that it should be accessible to anyone, because someone should be able to read it and then be like, oh, I want to go read those books, not have to read the book because they already are some scholar of the books.
yeah, totally. I mean, like if and when I teach a literature class again, because I've been teaching like, pre-college writing for some time now, I would teach this with your memoir and maybe a excerpt from, or a couple excerpts from the Ferrante books, but like after, I would teach those after, because I think that's what's really interesting
Oh, I love that.
is, yeah. So just that's my suggestion to everyone who listens to this, whoever you are. Like all colleges should buy books like this, I think, because this is the kind of thing that's like, it's not just literature for literature's sake. It's actually like a lot of different things that you can use for rhetoric, I think. And, thinking about fact and persona and all of these aspects that are kind of woven in here. And one thing that I want to talk about before we get off, if you have anything else to say about it, is this idea of the supporting, what is it? Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the word. I wrote like best craft advice ever. Where is it?
You're talking about beloved character syndrome.
Yes, the beloved character syndrome, and like,
Because I'm not going to take credit for it. It is
yeah,
so I don't know if she made it up. I don't know if she may have heard it from someone else, But I heard that from Chris Mazza, who was one of my professors at University of Illinois at Chicago. She's the head of the program there for many years, recently retired, author of a gazillion books. And she is the person who I heard talk about that. And I mean, there's a lot that is useful in teaching, but that has proven to me so useful in my teaching. And what beloved character syndrome? I mean, you can apply it widely. Obviously, there are characters with whom the author is maybe clearly infatuated and can't hide it, right? But that's, I would say, like low grade beloved character syndrome. Beloved character syndrome, as Chris applied it, is where kind of every character in the book really never thinks about anything except for that character, and all their actions and all their plot lines just concern that character. And so it's kind of like no one is the main character of their own life. That character is the main character of everybody's life. And that just is not how the world works. That is only how certain types of fiction work. Because no matter how obsessed with anybody, like you could be so jealous of your sister and think your sister is so much better than you, and your sister is so important, and you are so envious of your sister, but you also love her and you want to be like her, whatever, all these complexities that maybe dominate you, or like unrequited love of, some, oh, you're crazy about this person, they don't love you back, you think about it all the time, you never go more than 4 minutes without thinking about it. Nonetheless, you still have a whole other life, and you have things you want, you have stakes, you have desires and things that get in the way of those desires. And so Chris, and what she talked about when I was kind of like, a baby writer in her program, was, anytime that all any character on the page ever thinks about is like one particular character, you're just writing foils, and so I try to impart that so much when I'm teaching, and I try to think about it so much when I'm writing, is that like everybody here, no matter how much page time they get, they're the main character of what's happening in their own narrative. Like, and they have their own reasons, and you're a foil, And so kind of being aware of that, I just think it's one of the best. I like, if I didn't have that, I would have had to work 10 times as hard to convey a particular thing to my students in particular, where it's like, I don't have language for this thing you're doing, but that there was the language. So thanks, Chris.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I love it so much because I'm just like, ooh, like I don't write that much fiction, but I do notice it when I read, particularly fiction, probably in memoir too. I just can't think about it right now. But like, I remember, like, especially like older canon type books where it's just like, I just don't care. Like, I'm
Right.
tired of this person, and I don't believe that everybody feels this way. Like, it's not
Right.
believable. Like, it's
Right.
nutball. And it's what made me really happy about it. This is the most obscure, weird ass reference. And I'm like not a sci-fi person, but I have read the books, The Magicians, and I really like them. And I watched the show like all the way through.
I
And
don't know it at all. I don't know anything about it.
it's by Lev Grossman, and it's about fucking college magicians. It's like Harry Potter in college. And it's like one of the best series I've ever read because it kind of is like an argument for atheism
Oh,
in like the
cool.
most awe-filled way.
Love
Which
that.
probably sounds that, and that's my interpretation. But anyway, they like one season of the show like goes all into the supporting characters,
Right.
the main character thing. And I remember watching it and being like, God, this is the most important thing on TV about storytelling.
It's a really, like, I mean, it's become a little bit of a thing. Orange is the New Black did it, but it's so important, right? Because it's like, when you only see someone through a particular lens. I mean, it's one of the reasons I really love multi-point of view fiction. I write it, I love it. I think like Jennifer Egan's Visit from the Goon Squad is I mean, it's one of my favorite books. But generally, like whether it's Beloved, whether it's The God of Small Things, like things that shift narrative perspective, however it is they're doing it, Unbearable Lightness of Being, etc. I just really love that because I think it's not only that you can't get anything resembling an accurate perspective from kind of like only one vantage point per se, but also it just enriches everything so much. It makes everything so much more complicated because it's not like, oh, the old way of thinking about it would be like, oh, this character interprets this other character this way, and then the other one interprets it this way. So which one is wrong? Right. So that would, and like, who's unreliable? Who don't we trust? That's not it, right? I mean, they're both wrong, they're both right. Like, and because we're all more than one thing. And so like that way of getting in the complexity of people through kind of multidimensional lenses, I love that. It's very exciting. You can't do it really in the same way in memoir. Maybe that's why I kind of like tried to break out, break the fourth wall into cultural criticism and things like that, because it's not like you could jump into the point of view of another person in your story. Like that's in memoir, that would be called unethical, so unlike in fiction. So, you don't get to do it in the same way. All you can do is kind of self-interrogate and be like, okay, you know, other people also have their version of events and kind of be aware of that. But in fiction, you could just go so hard in all these different directions and they don't have to agree with one another. And that's what's exciting, right? Is it's like, how is this person also this person? Because that's the truth of all of us. We're all this person and also that person.